Okay, it looks like we're at the top of the hour. Welcome everyone to this Infotech and Microfocus webinar on archiving everything is risky business. My name is Q Mangus. I'll be your host here today, and I'm joined by Ryan Smith with Infotech. Um, Once again, we're happy that everyone could be here, and we're excited to bring you this topic. A few things to discuss before we jump into the presentation is if you do have any questions, we'd ask that you go ahead and put those in the question panel there in the GoToWebinar UI there, and we'll get to those questions at the end of the presentation. Also, this webinar is being recorded, so if you want to access this later on, you will be receiving an email shortly after the webinar has ended with a link to the recording, and feel free to share that and go back and review that when you'd like. So, once again, everybody, thank you for being here. I'm going to go ahead and turn the time over to Ryan Smith from Infotech, and he's going to get us started. Ryan.
All right, thank you very much, Q, and hello to everyone. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy days to hear our webinar on archiving everything is risky business. So today we're really here to talk about the risks of archiving everything and point out some mitigation strategies for how Infotech is seeing organizations address those concerns and how we might be able to do that through people, process, and technology. So before we get into that, I'll just give you a bit of an introduction to myself. Again, my name is Ryan Smith. I'm a director with Infotech Research Group's Enterprise Information Management team. And so I lead the sub-practice looking at everything enterprise information management related to strategy and business alignment, to selection and implementation of technology, as well as governing and optimization of existing EIM programs. And a key focus area for me and for enterprise information managers generally is information governance, which includes records management and information archiving strategies. I am the author of the Microfocus blog series, The Risks of Archiving Everything, which includes 3 blog posts and 1 white paper. And this webinar is actually part of this greater Risks of Archiving Everything series. So if you haven't yet, be sure to check out those materials. A lot of great insights go into those, and we reference them throughout the presentation here. But it is certainly worth taking a look. We go into a lot more detail than we will in the next 30 minutes. So I work for an organization called Infotech Research Group, and we were actually commissioned by Microfocus to complete this webinar series as well as the blogs and the white papers. What Infotech Research Group does is we're an IT research and consulting firm. And so in addition to enterprise information management, we cover the gamut of all concepts related to IT and really help organizations build out effective IT departments. So be sure to check out our research and best practice methodologies for assistance there. So like I say, the objective here is really to help managers and owners of electronic communications content avoid risks and add value through a selective information archiving strategy. To do this, we're going to go through and try to answer 5 questions here today. And the questions are related to, what information should be archived, how should I be contextualizing my archival strategy in a greater environmental and organizational context. What is the value? What are the value creating opportunities of archived information? We shouldn't just be storing it just because. We should be getting some value out of it. We'll talk a bit about the risks and irrationality of archiving everything and why this common approach really isn't the best approach. We'll talk about short-term antidotes to challenges associated with archiving everything, as well as long-term approaches for how to institute a proactive and responsive electronic communications content archiving strategy. First and foremost, we want to talk about what archiving is. Archiving really refers specifically to the long-term preservation of information. However, an archiving strategy can't take that narrow of a view. So you see on the slide here the information life cycle, 4 stages that an information asset would move through from cradle to grave. So content is first created, then it's captured into a system, then it is delivered and utilized for the purposes of process and workflow. Then finally, that content would reach a point where it's being retired. So archived for a period of time and then destroyed in accordance with retention periods. But in order to archive properly, we really need to be thinking about information from the moment it's being created. What are some things that we need to do as an asset's being ideated, being created, when it's being ingested and indexed in the system? What are the metadata fields we want to be collecting, for example? Do we want to be locating it in a certain what locations do we want to be storing it in, and the like? And in today's world, we've all heard the statistics about big data and information growth, so I won't bore you with those. But it's really not just about there being more and more data that we need to manage. There's a lot of different variety in the data that's being managed. So it used to be, if we were having this conversation 5-10 years ago, we'd be talking about strategies for email and attachment archiving. But the ESI, electronically stored information, is much more broad in today's world. We're dealing with tweets. We're dealing with instant message communications. We're dealing with social media posts, text messages, and the like. So, what opportunities can really be? What opportunities do we have that we can start to exploit with archiving? What is the theoretical why for archiving strategies? Well, a big piece of it is that a big piece of it is understanding this information value chain. In organizations, information, in addition to moving across 4 stages of a life cycle, it moves through this graduated conceptual model where it starts off as raw data, moves through a stage where it becomes information, where we've contextualized the data, becomes knowledge when we're able to actually take that information to the next level, and then finally it becomes insight, where we are actively taking a course of action as a result of that information. So big data, as we know, can be a major engine for driving insights in an organization. And the vast majority of big data is unstructured information. And again, the vast majority of unstructured information is data that is stored in archives. It's our records, it's our documents, it's the tweets, it's the IM, etc., etc. Maintaining the right information in these archives has 2 really valuable opportunities. First, it provides a historical record of business transactions and operations. You are able to get to a point in time and see exactly what was the situation, what was the information assets that were available. That's what archiving provides. But it also provides, on more of the data science side of the house, it provides a major source for analytics, where we can get at some more meaningful insights with the use of semantic analysis, natural language processing, machine learning, and automated cognition. And it's not just marketing hype that that unstructured data, it drives business value. The studies are showing, the average Fortune 1000 company could increase its value by $2 billion with a B by just taking improvement by making a 10% adjustment to the usability of its information. So by investing in archiving strategies, by investing in information architecture design. So archiving is valuable But like most things in life, it must be done in moderation in order to be truly effective. Over-archiving, which really boils down to keeping information that you don't need to be keeping, is the most common form. Why you can see here a list of 6 of the most common issues that are kind of associated with over archiving, but the issues really do persist around process efficiency, resource efficiency, and business and financial risk. So process efficiency, we have too much information. We can't find the right information at the right time. It's taking us, whether it's a process of taking taking longer than average to actually return a piece of content, or if we're having to recreate that content because we can't find it, or we're not confident that it's the right version. All of these are adding to process efficiency. Resource efficiency, where we're talking about having more information than we need, that filling up storage space on our network drives and in our ECM systems and our archives. But not just technological resource efficiency, there's also the human factor. I don't know. One question I often ask clients is, okay, how long does it take you to find a piece of information? But then how many people did you have to go through to find that given piece of information? For every other person we're hitting there, it's additional drag on the process, which has a negative effect on our service turnaround times. And also, we're wasting people's times on things that that they could be better spent elsewhere. And then finally, the business and social risks. By having this information on hand, we expose ourselves to the risk that it could be called in under a retrieval request for e-discovery or for litigation reasons. And one real key thing to take away from this slide here is that the vast majority of the information we are storing, it is what's considered rot, and you want to rid your content rot. So AIM, the Association for Image and Information Management, estimates that up to 70% of your organizational content is either redundant, meaning there's duplicates. It's obsolete, meaning it's no longer relevant, or it's trivial. It's just not as important as other things. And for more information on the risks, the blog 1 in the series, be sure to read that because we go into a lot more detail around specific risks. In dealing with over archiving, so if I am an over archiver, what can I do to start to mitigate this? Well, the first thing, well, there's really a short-term and a long-term approach to solving these problems, and I'll talk about the short-term approaches here. Really, what you want to do, it boils down to a risk management approach. So you want to identify and achieve quick wins as you can. So we saw a list earlier of potential risks that could come up. What an organization will do to ascertain whether or not they need to take action there is first they will consciously define their risk appetite. And this is usually listed as a dollar figure. So, anything under $100,000, we can absorb that risk, for example. It depends on the organization's maturity, the longevity of the organization, and even the individuals. It comes down to the individuals that are in the organization, what the risk tolerance is. But once there is a general understanding of that, they can move forward with some more detailed assessment. So how do you assess each risk? Well, first you want to quantify those risks by listing those in the terms of their dollar impact. And the way you calculate that is, well, for example, if we have the risk of poor findability in e-discovery, where it takes far too long to assemble all the case materials, we can calculate the cost of that by taking the average hourly salary, blended right, of the legal teams that are working on that, and multiply it by the time it takes to find and process all the case files. Longer term, though, organizations need to be broader. They need to be more proactive with their view for an archival strategy. And we've talked before about how that will consider all the different stages of the life cycle. In addition, it needs to consider the various information domains that are present in the organization, as well as 3 levels of their information management operating model. What you see listed there is regulatory, industry, and organization. I'll talk first about the information domains. Information domains, really what they are is a categorization of all the information that exists in an organization. So you can categorize, you can break down the organization by process, by department, or as we see here, by information asset type. It really doesn't matter. It is a bit of an arbitrary distinction. If it is your first time looking at defining information domains, the easiest place to start is by looking at it by departments. So we have the HR department's information, we have finances information, we have marketings, et cetera, et cetera. The next thing we want to do is we want to start to identify what are the things that we must do as part of our information archiving strategy, what are the things we should do, and what are the things we want to do. So the must-dos are our regulatory layer. That's where laws and regulations are dictating things that must happen. At the industry layer, these are more things that help us keep up with the Joneses. So we're looking at research and advisory groups for this. We're looking at our own competitive studies. We're leaning on our colleagues in peer organizations to understand what practices they're taking, and we're seeing which ones could apply to us. And at the organizational level, this is where where our strategies become truly unique to our organization. And we tackle things that are over and above regulatory and industry standards. We'll look at each of these in more detail in the coming slides, but first I just want to state that, in order to determine this operating model, you really need to have the right people in the room. This can't be something that's developed in a vacuum. So for the regulatory layer, you're looking at your legal teams, your risk, your governance teams. If there's any audit or compliance groups in the organization, get them involved. They're the ones that will be most familiar with the regulations themselves and the implications for information management. Industry groups, like I mentioned, competitive studies, your personal colleagues, and research and advisory groups like Infotech Research Group offers information in that capacity. And then for unique organizational considerations, this really does come down to the executive decision makers in the company and what their specific needs and wants would be. So be sure to get those folks involved. So regulatory. Remember, this is the layer of your operating model which sets the. These are the must-dos. So it's setting things like your minimum and maximum retention periods. It's creating standards for storage media. It's the thing that dictates things like paper record keeping. What organizations will do is treat this as kind of the minimum viable archiving plan. What do I have to do to avoid getting my wrists slapped or paying expensive non-compliance fees? And a lot of organizations will stop there. For example, one such regulation here would be PCI for the payment card industry. And it's dictating that PCI related information assets need to be stored for a period of 7 years at least. Industry considerations, again, these are the should do's, the things that allow you to keep up with the Joneses, stay competitive in your industry. Examples of this would include, the digitalization. We're seeing a big trend in various industries of organizations digitalizing their spreadsheets. So what used to be in Excel is now being done in SharePoint lists. It's a more robust medium. There's more to there's more auditability with these tools, and of course more robust process automation. Another example would be hierarchical storage management strategies from library sciences industry. There's no regulation saying that those need to exist, but all of the organizations tend to do it because it's a good cost-saving method. For unique organizational considerations, remember these are the want-to-dos. No one's telling us to do this. These are things we are doing of our own accord. These are things over and above the industry regulations, the industry and regulatory considerations. And these are the things that truly make our operating models unique and even competitive. One example that I think about here is Walt Disney World. No one's telling the Walt Disney Corporation to keep the early pictures of the park. No one's telling them to keep the early drawings of Walt Disney that he created, but there is an inherent value in that. There's historic value, sentimental value, even strategic value. Now Disney can turn those into profit-generating museums and archives. But having the framework in place is one thing. The next step is really to make some key decisions within that framework. So understanding what I must do, what I could do, what I should do. The next step is to define the different sensitivity levels of information present in your organization's information domains. So these classification levels, they act as what they're doing is they're acting as a triage unit for the information that enters your organization. Much like when a patient enters the emergency room, he is assessed and he is brought to, or she is brought to the appropriate next stage in the hospital treatment. Similarly, information classification saying up front, okay, is this information private, business sensitive, business confidential, business general, public? And again, this is just an example. There are a wide range of classification schemes. The rule of thumb is to keep it to no more than 6 levels. Then it becomes difficult to manage beyond that. But each classification level is going to define a certain standard of care that needs to be adhered to. And if we remember back to the information lifecycle, this is where those standards of care are derived from. So you see listed on the side there for the most common, the most critical standards of care for archiving strategies. We'll show them again here, but as a thought model for defining your standards of care, you want to understand, okay, when a content asset's being generated, is there any special consideration I need to have around how it's being labeled? And how is that different for private information versus public information versus business critical information, et cetera, et cetera? And the reason you want to list all these out is because it provides you a comprehensive set of treatment for your different types of information that you can then formalize in policies, which is the next piece. So again, policies aligned to that information life cycle, and they build on those standards of care by defining programs which establish and enforce the standards of care themselves. So they'll include definitions of process, of specific standards, of procedures, staffing, anything like that to ensure that the standards of care are adhered to. And while there won't be necessarily a one-to-one mapping, not each standard of care would convert to a policy. In fact, the opposite, usually multiple standards of care would map to a single policy. But the reason to keep them separate is because you want to ensure that that you are being comprehensive of your different information sensitivities when you define your policies. And this is another area Infotech Research Group can help with. We offer our members starting point templates for 12 of the most common policies that are included in archival strategies. So if you're interested in what those templates look like, please let us know, and we'll be in touch after this webinar. Policies, information classification, they're not really worth the paper they're written on without proper governance bodies and individuals and processes to actualize them in your organization. So like a society that has a Senate but no police force, if we don't maintain compliance through activity, um, through people and process, ad hoc information management will occur. And ad hoc information management tends to be chaotic, and it tends to lead to many of the risks that we've been discussing throughout this webinar. And while no two organizations are the same, most will take a very similar approach when defining their governance model. So they'll divide the governance responsibilities across three levels of the organization. The strategic level, where direction's being set, where things are being approved, where jobs and staff are being ordered up. The operational level, where classification schemes are being generated, where policies are being identified, and then the working group levels where the actual legwork is happening, where systems are being configured, where policies are being drafted, et cetera, et cetera. And many of these governance tasks, while people and process is certainly a critical component of any archiving strategy, technology is a major part, and the advances that we've seen in the marketplace to help advance a lot of the process, a lot of the governance needs that are there as part of an archiving strategy, are starting to be incorporated into vendors' portfolios. So, for example, a product suite offered by a company like Micro Focus would be able to provide an organization with the following: rules-based process management, access rights management, taxonomy and library services, so you get that findability aspect. Behavioral analytics, so you can audit you can audit for check-in and check-out, and edit histories, as well as defensible disposal. So tracking user behavior and ensuring that when content is being deleted, it's being done so in compliance with a regulatory standard. So, in closing here, I'll just say organizations really need to be both proactive and responsive when it comes to their information archiving strategies. If they don't, the business productivity, resource efficiency, and risk mitigation all suffer. But if they can get it right, if they do invest in adequate operating model definition, if they do invest in their policies and standards of care, if they get it right, it's gonna lead to faster service turnaround times, quicker processing. It's going to lead to the right information being in the right format at the right time for the right user, and it'll act to minimize a lot of risk. So at this point, I just want to, I'll invite Q Mangus from Micro Focus to conclude today's webinar. Q?
Great, thanks, Ryan. Great information. If you could just go to the next slide there for me. So, great information, and we know that, as Ryan said, you have to have a policy, and you have to be able to archive the correct information. And Ryan alluded to this a little bit, but here at Microfocus, we have a product that can help you with that. It's Retain Unified Archiving. And what makes Retain different is we give that ability to have all of your electronic communication, your email, your social media, your mobile communication, instant messaging archived into one central archive. And we give you the ability to easily access that archive to help you manage your data, be able to make sure that you're archiving what you should and letting go of that stuff that you shouldn't be. And so Retain features policy-based archiving, giving you the ability to keep the data that you need and eliminate that data that isn't relevant or valid. And the policy can be based on time. So let's say anything older than 30 days is archived and it stays on the archive up to, say, 7 years. Once it hits that policy, it's automatically deleted off. And it can also be based on users, on mailboxes. That's all policies that you can set up. And with Retain, we give you that flexible archive access where you can access it via the web UI, an email plugin, the mobile app, or an offline viewer. And finally, with Retain, one of the things that makes it different from other archiving solutions is that we include those built-in e-discovery tools so that you can easily search your archive. You can place items on litigation hold. You can export items to a PDF as an example. And also you can grant different teams rights to be able to access that archive. So you don't have to leave it just up to the administrator or just up to IT to be able to access the archive. You can actually grant rights to, say, a legal team or HR to be able to access that archive. So that is a solution that we provide to help you manage your communication archiving and make sure that you have a good policy in place and a solution to validate that policy. If you'd like more information about that, feel free to reach out to us or visit us at microfocus.com and we can provide more information and a price quote to see how that could work for you. So once again, I'd like to thank Ryan for the information and for Infotech, and I'd encourage you, as he stated, to read those blog posts, and you can access them at blog.microfocus.com. And the white papers and other resources. I'll give Ryan some more time just to talk about that a little bit. Thanks again, everybody, and I'm going to look through here to see if there's any questions.
Great, thank you, Q. And yes, so if you are interested in looking more in depth at the topic that we have been discussing here today, the risks of archiving everything, or information management generally, additional resources that are worthwhile, the Microfocus white papers, which I believe Q will be making available to attendees today. The blog posts themselves, there are 3 blog posts to read through that touch on everything. I'll get into more of the details around risks and risk mitigation, as well as Infotech's resources. If you click that link, and we will make this deck and the slides available after the session here today. But there's a wealth of materials available through Infotech that can help with information management and archiving strategies. So,
Great.
yeah, thanks, Q. I'll hand it back to you.
Perfect. I'm looking to see if we have any questions. The one question that came through is just if you'll be able to get a copy of these slides. Yes, we can make that available to you. And then another one is if this is being recorded. Yes, this webinar has been recorded, so we'll get you the webinar recording. Also, everybody who registered for this webinar, so everyone who's on here, will get a copy of that white paper as well. Let's just see if we have any other questions. That looks like all the questions we have for now. Once again, thanks everyone for being here and for your participation, and thanks Ryan for the information. And yes, everyone look for that email with those links to the recording and to that white paper. Thanks again, Ryan.
Thank you.